Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with
Dr. Jessie Mahoney
and Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are here to help you learn to pause and be present, awaken your breath, and harness the ripple effects of mindfulness for radiant health.
We get you. We know you. We are you.
We have both been successful on the surface, yet struggling underneath. We have both had cluttered brains, been overwhelmed, and exhausted.
We're healers who have found solutions and want to share them with you.
Join us here to discover a better way.
Welcome to episode 20. A mindful reminder that our podcast should not be considered as medical advice.
This is our next episode in our series about mindful love. And today we wanted to chat about showing up with mindful love for your relationship with your own mother. As we mentioned last time, many of you may have beautiful and harmonious relationships with your mom, and many of you may not. And sometimes many of us have both, depending on the day and the season of our relationship. Our intention for this episode today is to reflect on how mindfulness can help guide us and ground us through this most intimate of life's relationships.
We hope that you'll discover from reflecting about this relationship that it's an opportunity to practice mindfulness, to notice what arises as you contemplate this relationship, as you live this relationship with your mother without judgment.
And the takeaways from today's episode are that love is not always harmonious, and it doesn't always feel good, and it's not supposed to. That we have choice, that peace is possible if you choose it, and so is connection. But you can also just choose to let your relationship with your mother be, choose to let go of the struggle and put the heavy backpack down. It's your choice, whatever you choose. I wanted to start off this episode with a beautiful quote from a book that I often read in yoga. It's called An Invitation to Pause Again by Janet Archer. And she writes short snippets about her mom. And her mom has severe dementia. And in preface of the book, she dedicates the book to her mom. And her dedication says this: "Little did I know in the end, you would be one of my greatest teachers. I love how life always gives us what we need most. And life gave me you." This quote, I happened upon it when I was preparing for a yoga class, and I thought, wow, this is really the truth about our mothers, that we all tend to wish our moms would be different, at least in some way. And yet, likely, life gave us exactly what we needed as a mom. So many people don't talk about their relationships with their moms and how difficult they are. And we notice on Facebook and in life that everyone else seems to have a great relationship. And we wonder why we struggle or what we did wrong. And we feel badly about perhaps the imperfections of our own relationship and don't understand why there's a problem. Some people understand clearly why there's a problem, and they look back at their childhood and carry it like a heavy backpack, and there's tons of resentment and anger. And I want to acknowledge many people had traumatic childhoods as well. And so at the beginning of this conversation, I wanted to make certain that this conversation is not to dismiss anyone's lived experience as a child or with their mom, but purely to offer peace and connection as a choice for you to help you, whether it's just within you or something that you decide to do with your mom. So with that, I love to think about my relationship with my mom as she is exactly the mom I have, for better or worse. It's kind of like a marriage, except you didn't choose it. But realizing that she comes to the relationship for better or worse, and so do I. And I also like to think about my mom as being the right one and the most perfect one for me. I often say because she's the one I have. And that's acceptance, but it's also looking on the bright side. and realizing that they're perfect exactly as they are, because that's how they are. So this taps back into what we brought up last time, this idea of acceptance and choosing thoughts that serve you. And it isn't to condone what your mom does or to even say that you like it. You can, of course, as those of you who work with me know, choose to accept but not like it. But you choose to accept it because it serves you. So you can wish she was different and realize that changing her is likely not an option. And also that if you were to insist that she change, she might insist that you change. And I certainly don't want that. So the other thing that pops up here is this idea of duality in yoga, and that you can have good and bad. And so you can wish your mom were different and accept her as she is or isn't or wasn't. And that both can happen at the same time. And you can still love her exactly as she is.
So holding the dualities, really embracing the and, that you can simultaneously allow and accept your mom to be just as she is, not necessarily liking or condoning aspects of your relationship with your mother, and yet still at the same time being immensely grateful to them for being your mom, for caregiving, and also allowing ourselves to love them just as they are.
I'm curious how easy that is for you to do.
It's taken years, probably decades of practice to be able to not lump a difficult conversation with my mom as automatically bad and having that affect my love for her. Now the love is very unconditional. There's no doubt about that. And I think I've given myself permission to really feel the anger or even the resentment sometimes at the tone of a particular conversation or how her words have landed with me. So the allowing and accepting has come from allowing and accepting my mom just as she is, but also allowing and accepting of myself and my emotions, especially when difficult communication arises.
And I asked you that not to put you on the spot, but as I was listening to you say it, I was like thinking to myself how hard it is to do and how much I still practice. And the other thing I just wanted to bring up here is that relationships with moms, the same duality, the whole relationships are good and bad. And part of the reason that we struggle so much with them is because we love them so much. And if we didn't care at all, there wouldn't be a struggle. And that relationship is just an important relationship inherent in being a human. And so I want to make sure as we head further into this discussion that it isn't that it's not a negative thing. It's really that we all want to feel more love and we want to feel more connection and we want to feel at peace with our moms. And that the conversation is coming from a place of love, realizing that all the intricacies of this relationship, kind of like parenting, right, make it challenging, whether you're the parent or the child. And so either end feels really difficult.
And taking that to a whole nother level, this whole podcast, yes, it's about relationships with our mothers, but it can also be applied to just relationships in general, especially with a loved one that is very close to you or has a particular biologic relationship to you.
So it's interesting what our brains tell us about our moms. And so many of us want them to act differently because we think we would feel differently, or if they raised us differently, we would feel differently or be differently. And getting back into this thought about like acceptance, what if she was the exact mom you needed to grow into who you are now and beyond, and that whatever she brought was there to teach you? And Janet Archer's quote about her mom struggling with dementia and all that she learned from her, she feels like it was exactly what she needed in this season of her life, which is in her 60s and 70s. And her mom's 80s, 90s. I don't know exactly their ages, but the idea that we learn from them what we needed and just accepting and honoring that. And we wanted to move forward and offer what I would call strategic offerings from mindfulness and coaching. And I came up with this idea that they're there to help you improve your relationship with your mom, or for some of you to come to peace with your relationship with your mom, and for others, perhaps to honor your relationship with your mom, and just choosing with intention which of those feels right to you, and taking all of the offerings with a grain of salt and use what feels authentic to you in your relationship and the most helpful. So the first one, again, this week is actually one that we mentioned last week. And I wanted to throw out there that what we repeat, we remember, and that the tools that apply in one relationship or even to an important day would also apply to an important relationship. And so it's once again noticing abundance, and perhaps noticing your tendency, not just in your relationship with your mom, but in life, to notice scarcity and what wasn't good and what needs fixing. And so perhaps looking at your mom in your childhood and noticing not how she fell short, but what you learned from it and how it helped you become the person that you became today. And what if she did the best she could and she's doing the best she can? And what is good about that best? And how is that special, unique, and helpful? Sometimes even, how did she help you become the mom that you are today? And perhaps that could be in reaction to things that she did that you discovered you wanted to do differently. But rather than feeling anger and frustration and resentment, realize the abundance of that, even though it may feel a little funny to think about it that way, as the opportunity to learn how you did not want to show up as a parent and how you would like to show up differently.
It's so helpful to reflect upon these questions, Jesse, but I'm going to invite listeners to take a step back for a second to note that these questions can help us move from our natural innate tendency to hold on to the negative. So looking at and accepting that we have intrinsically negative attention bias, but these questions allow us to approach our relationship with our mothers more with positive attention bias. And our relationships with our mothers can definitely invoke both. So I wanted to introduce this concept that is taught in mindfulness-based stress reduction of having a palms wide open approach, especially when there are difficult or stressful situations that might arise. So holding your palms wide open, are we able to allow and accept, like we had talked about earlier in this episode, all the circumstances to land on our palms just as they are? And are we able to stop trying to push away or resist that particular circumstance, particularly because that particular difficult circumstance has already landed? And so, can we stop resisting the difficulty and the stress? And then conversely, can we stop grasping and clinging on to positive events, which with such might and fury that the clinging aspect, our fists tightly balled up, clinging so hard and so vigorously that it actually can cause ourselves harm in that respect, that you cling to things so much that there's actually suffering in that. So this palms wide open approach allows us to encounter our relationship, our very non-linear relationships with our mothers, with the statement of inviting curiosity and asking that question, or saying the statement of how interesting that this is happening this way. And so this how interesting statement invokes one of the 9 attitudes of mindfulness, which is curiosity.
You brought up this how interesting question, and it applies so well to difficult relationships. And what I love about it is that it creates the spaciousness. And when I see you with your hands wide open, that's the spaciousness. It's the willingness to sort of let whatever is be, and not have to react and not have to respond. And kind of what I mentioned in the beginning, maybe you can put the heavy backpack down, or maybe you can acknowledge that once again, that duality, the relationship's going to be good and bad. And that some days are going to be amazing with your mom and some days may not, or some seasons where, my mom was involved in my life many, many times. Every day when my kids were younger, she helped watch them when I was in medical training. And I probably spoke to her 25 times a day. And now we speak a lot less and we're in different seasons. And so that we can have different times and there can be good and bad, and just leaving your hands open for whatever that is. And curiosity to me is so beautiful because it's spacious. And when we can approach things that involve these intense emotions and love with spaciousness and curiosity, it can make such a difference. And I wanted to reflect, I often use the phrase, of course, with my mom, like, of course, she answered that way. And I feel like, I've known her my entire life, so I can predict often how she'll respond. And I often still think, because in my manual about how she should respond, I expect or think she should respond differently. And then, of course, she always responds in the way that she does. But your tip of how interesting is a much more loving way to think about it. So instead of just sort of accepting it, I could be like, how interesting. And all of a sudden, a smile comes to my face. It comes a little bit with, of course, but it's much broader and much more open and receptive and loving. The how interesting. So that little 2 words has supplanted, of course, in my mind, and I just love it. And then how interesting can lead you to step out of judgment. That's the other thing that's so powerful about it. And you can start to look for understanding or connection. So when you tap into this curiosity and trying to think about how maybe your mom is like you, or how do you both want the same thing, but perhaps you're coming at it differently, that one is tremendously helpful. Because I know, for example, that my mom loves my children and wants the best for them, but her thoughts about what they should do are different than my thoughts about what they should do, and are 100% different than their thoughts about what they should do, since they're teens and young adults. And so tapping into just curiosity, how do we all want the same thing, can be very uniting and connecting. And I think it's really a useful tool.
Curiosity is something that you can apply to anything that happens or doesn't happen. And like you had said before, invoking curiosity can actually help us soften our automatic tendency to judge. So our judging minds, as an evolutionarily advantageous trait, doesn't necessarily serve us now in the 21st century, nor does it really reflect reality. We have this automatic tendency to label thoughts, situations as good and bad, black or white, when in reality, circumstances are mostly somewhere in between. And this ability for ourselves as human beings, that we can hold dualities concurrently. Each situation has both good and bad aspects to them. So once again, calling out the dualities and our capacity for holding dualities, and how curiosity can be a way to remind ourselves that we're capable of that.
It's interesting that you bring up that concept at the same time of allowing both to be simultaneously. It's also important that we experience both, like the really good and the really challenging. And that it's the contrast sort of in that full spectrum of living that makes life interesting. And I think our culture always thinks our relationship should always be good. And if there's conflict or if there's a negative event, that it would be bad. But part of why the good feels good is in contrast to the bad. And so when you said in the middle, my mind went to this thought that the middle is a bit gray, right? And so we don't necessarily always want to be in the middle, but having those hands wide open for both extremes and realizing that they're actually necessary makes the hard part of the extreme a little more comfortable to experience.
Embrace the full spectrum of the tones of our relationships, good, bad, and everything in between.
I love that. And you keep using this word tone, and tone is key in your relationship with your mother. It feels like just the perfect word. And that ties into what I wanted to bring up next, which is showing up once again with mindful intention. So rather than expectation, choosing how you want to show up. And I was thinking, I like to think about choosing how you want to feel. But a new twist on that that's come up based on your word tone is choosing the tone you want to set for the relationship. Sometimes that might even feel more comfortable rather than choosing how you want to feel. When I think about choosing how I want to feel peaceful when I talk to my mom. For me, that's accessible. And if I think about it that way, well, what would peace do? Then I can choose my responses. I can choose what time we choose to talk and what topics we choose to talk about. And I can choose with thoughtfulness and spaciousness how I respond to whatever she might bring up. And I can choose to enjoy the things she brings up. And I can choose to let drop the things that I don't need to carry that perhaps she brings up. And I say that with loving kindness. I don't think my mom will ever listen to this podcast, but in case she does, it's really around knowing that the relationship is so important that choosing peace is the right answer. You could also choose to choose understanding or choose connection. And when you show up with that intention in mind, it shifts the tone of the whole experience.
Super helpful questions to ask yourself to help you set your tone, to really set your authentic tone of how you show up for yourself and your mother. And at the same time, if difficulty and discomfort arise from the conversation or an encounter, despite the intention, and if the conversation doesn't go the way that you had predicted and the tone gets thrown off, then I also want to invite you to name what you feel in the moment when the difficulty or stress arises, particularly in relationships with your mother. Allowing yourself to feel the feelings, naming the feelings, what you name, you tame, giving yourself permission for some space to allow and accept your emotions and what they feel like in your body, just as they are.
And maybe even not taming them, sometimes just letting them be and letting them just sort of move. I often talk in yoga about letting the tingles of good like spread around, but even if it's tingles of frustration, like that's where it softens and eventually dissipates. It's what we resist makes it grow. And so it might be a negative emotion and you want to feel it, but maybe you don't even have to tame it. Sometimes we put so much pressure on ourselves that I don't want to feel that way. And then the negative feeling persists. And so I would offer that sometimes letting it be is a really powerful option.
A constant work in progress for me is accepting the fact that we can't control the thoughts or actions of others, least of all, perhaps our mothers. And that actually rhymed. I just realized that. But in contrast, reminding everyone that you can control how those thoughts or actions land with you. So you get to choose your response, and you get to choose whether or not you prioritize creating a safe space for love for yourself, especially if you feel like the encounter is not providing a safe space or is not a loving encounter. What for me, from my own experience, has been immensely triggering with my mom, who I love dearly. She has been very attached to her own negative attention bias. And oftentimes that is forefront and center of our conversations, to the point where the vast majority of my conversations with my mom are trying to deflect her criticisms of me from my weight to how I'm raising my daughters. And it came to a point where I was actually dreading taking her phone calls because they were basically all negatively communicated. It was basically a monologue of her criticisms of different aspects of me. And the criticisms, I realized, were landing in a way where she was actually trying to shame me, to try to shame me into changing the way I was doing things, to change my own circumstances or for that of my daughter. Perhaps she forgot, I can only presume, but perhaps she forgot that I was doing the best that I could under the very stressful circumstances, particularly of this past year. So, in a recent, rather heated exchange, I had to tell her, as uncomfortable as it was for me to do, that I didn't want her to mention weight anymore in any of our conversations. And this is not the first time that I've had to tell her this. But I also had to reinforce that she is not to mention weight to me ever again, especially in front of my daughters. Her words were not helpful for me, and I had to tell her this, that they hurt. So I gave myself permission to distance myself from her after communicating this with her. And intentionally, I didn't speak to her for several days, not necessarily to like get back at her or to teach her a lesson, but to give myself permission to really experience the body sensations and to go through all of the emotions of anger, frustration, feeling really wounded. And at some points, like not enough. Checking in with my own sense of self-worth, despite and in spite of her criticisms. And since then, I'm happy to say that our conversations have been much more constructive for me, where I feel like because of that somewhat uncomfortable exchange and the distance that I intentionally put between me and my mother, I've given the power back to myself for reflecting back to her how her words make me feel. So it's a constant work in progress. And I by no means have a perfect relationship with my mom. But I've realized that in the process of working on our relationship, I've given myself permission to be vulnerable with her, to actually name my feelings, and to choose to say no to her destructive criticism as opposed to constructive criticism. So I wanted to share that with all of you.
I have a number of thoughts about that. You said that perhaps she didn't, or she forgot that you were doing the best that you could. And I wondered if she couldn't see it even, because sometimes people don't see it or they're not able to see it. And our expectation is that they should be able to see it, but maybe she couldn't. And when I think about it that way, it softens it a little bit. The other thing is that she couldn't see that you were doing the best that you can. And maybe you can't see that she was doing the best that she can. I don't know, because I'm not there. And I'm really reflecting, I think, on my own relationship here, which is that when I heard you say that, I thought, oh, sometimes I don't appreciate that she's doing the best that she can. And I think she's falling short, just as she sees that in me. So I offer that as an intriguing flip on it. The other thing that came to mind as you were talking that just felt really powerful to share is the thought that, again, I wasn't there. I am certain, though, that her criticisms came from a place of love. And my mom's criticisms and anxiety that she likes to share come from a place of love, genuine concern and love for her grandchildren and me and whatever else might be an issue. And so I often have to remind myself that this is her way of expressing love. It's just different than I think she should express love. And I would wish she would show it in a different way. So I wanted to reflect on those two things, and one other, which is just this concept of boundaries as an expression of love. And you mentioned not as a punishment or not as an, I cannot think of the word, it's just completely escaping me, but ultimatum, but but as an expression of love. Because if you continued to let your mom criticize you, you would continue to feel hurt, anger, and resentment. And that is not loving her. And when we don't set boundaries and we continue to feel hurt and resentful, and we let someone continue to do those things where we think we're doing it from a place of love, it's really not love. And so the same thing, I think, comes up for me when I'm engaging in whatever it is with my mom or in any other difficult relationship, realizing that sometimes you need to set a boundary for yourself, and that showing up with love sometimes looks like not showing up, or telling someone that you need a break, or taking a break yourself.
Negative attention bias can become all consuming. And I think that in the difficult communication I had with my mother, that's probably what had happened. And that we can choose to assume positive intent from both sides of a dialogue. Like, can we allow ourselves to assume that the members of a participating dialogue are all coming from a place of positive intent? And that, I think you're absolutely right. Perhaps her language in showing love is that of criticism, is that of wanting betterment for me and my daughters. And that
I
it's
just want to
expressed.
call out curiosity there.
Yeah.
You're invoking curiosity right here.
And that the language that she's using is not landing in a way that serves me. But in reflecting upon the origins of her language, perhaps that's the only way that she knows how to communicate this information. So yes, absolutely. Lots of room for contemplation and reflection with a lens of curiosity, kindness, and compassion.
So as we come to a close, two sort of themes keep popping up, which is choice. Choice in how we experience the relationship, choice in how we show up for it with our intention and our tone, and whether we show up with curiosity. And then the other thing is just this idea that sometimes our relationships with our mothers have seasons, and realizing that our relationships with our mothers are very, very long, right? We're born, and however long we live is however long the relationship is. Even when your mom is no longer with us, many, many, many people carry a lot from that relationship with them. And so just appreciating that there will be different seasons, and you may have seasons where you are better connected, and you may have seasons where you're less connected. You may have seasons where you have lots of love and acceptance and understanding, and there may be seasons that need space. And so that you have the choice to show up for it, however it serves you. And you also have the choice to tell a story about whatever's happening that serves you. And this concept of seasons and seeing it as a season is really a way of telling a story about what's happening in this moment, and not getting stuck and focused on the length and the challenge and the difficult components of it, and just enjoying where you are in the moment.
Thanks so much for listening. We're so grateful for all the follows. If you liked our episode today, please leave us lots of stars and positive reviews. And we wish you all a happy Mother's Day, whether or not you're a mother, have a mother or a mother figure, want to be a mother or don't want to be a mother.
And if you want to work on your own relationship with your mother, or your relation or being a mother, highly recommend it. Learning to implement these strategies in your own relationship, as we both reflected, it takes much practice and time and patience with yourself. So I encourage you to consider joining me for Mindful Love, where we take these strategies and we learn to practice them in your own relationships and look at your own thoughts and stories that you're telling and learn to retell them and learn to choose the tone and the intention and notice and decide how you are showing up and how you want to show up. So if you want to find out more about that, you can check the show notes. There's a link to find out more about Mindful Love. It starts in June. And an offering that your future self will thank you. Stay on after the singing bowl for the mindful moment, our offering as a mindful practice, a gift to all of you. As always, if you want to declutter your mind, be more present, and start truly living your one wild and precious life, come find us at the mindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Work with one of us.
Work with both of us.
Start or uplevel your mindfulness practice.
Discover how mindful coaching can change your life.
Or even better, do both as part of our Mindful Healers programs and retreats. You can find links to find out more about our programs and join our communities at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
Reach out and get started on your journey to a life better lived today.
The content of this podcast is not meant to be medical or life advice. If you choose to participate in our mindful moments, please do so safely.
Welcome to this mindful moment. Noticing perhaps that this topic has perhaps created some tension within you and perhaps led you to feel some judgment about yourself or judgment about your relationships with your mother. And often the relationships that we care very deeply about are the ones that feel the most distressing. So I wanted to offer an opportunity for a bit of self-compassion and hand to heart and nourishing your own heart first. So find a comfortable seat if you are in a safe space to do so. And if not, please continue driving with care or walking with care. But if you can partake, take a moment to ground your sit bones into whatever you happen to be sitting on. And if you're standing, ground your feet into the earth and take comfort from the stability and security of the earth underneath you and draw its strength and energy up through you as a strong, firm, connecting energetic force. And tilt your pelvis forward slightly if you're sitting and grow your spine long and tall and reach the crown of your head towards the sky and drop your shoulders. And take in a long, deep inhale through your nose and an exhale through your mouth. And another long, deep inhale through your nose and an exhale. And with this inhale, breathe in calm, peace, love, connection, and acceptance. Breathe out resentment, irritation, annoyance, judgment. Breathe in curiosity and spaciousness. And breathe out tenseness and heaviness and tightness. Bring your left hand to your heart and press it gently into that heart space, the heel of your hand. Bring your right hand and rest it gently atop the left hand, both atop your heart, and press in gently. Connect with your own heart, your own spot for love, compassion, acceptance. Just notice how it feels in this moment. Can you send it a little compassion? Send it a little nourishment. Take in a deep breath through your nose. And a long, sweet exhale. And an inhale, noticing that your heart nourishes itself first. And an exhale, making space in that pocket behind the heart for your heart to grow and fill a little bit. Sending yourself some compassion here so that you can nourish yourself and have a little more compassion and acceptance and curiosity to bring out with you to your relationships after listening. And take a moment to notice and appreciate how well you've handled your relationships throughout your life. Instead of noticing what's wrong or what hasn't worked, what has worked. And take a moment to appreciate how the other person, perhaps your mother, has handled it in the best way that she likely knew how. And that what you can control is you going back to your relationship with more love and more curiosity, with an intentional tone, whether it be of peace, understanding, connection, love, acceptance, or perhaps spaciousness for both of you, not connecting, whatever it might look like, is perfectly fine. Press your hand into your heart gently once again, with full acceptance and compassion for yourself, exactly as you are. Take in a long inhale and a smooth exhale. And full acceptance for your mother or a difficult relationship that you may have. Complete acceptance, love, compassion for them exactly as they are, acknowledging that they are likely doing the best that they can do in the moment with the skills and information and humanness that they have. And with the last inhale, a wish that perhaps things might be different going forward. And exhale. Bring your hands to heart center, palms touch, finger pads touch. And just for a moment, connect with your intention for your difficult relationship. How would you like to show up going forward with more connection, perhaps spaciousness, acceptance of the other person, or acceptance of yourself that you need space, whatever it might be? Sending love to all of you and all of those that you love. May you all be well. May you all be safe. May you all be loved. And may you all have a happy Mother's Day, whoever you are and whoever you may celebrate. A moment to honor this most intimate relationship that we all have in some form, as we were all born from someone. Have a beautiful week.